Tonight, Bill C-5 just became law without any new amendments, and that is really bad. Because while some amendments were added to it in the House that addressed some major concerns, it wasn't enough. Like, to give you an example, if a major project moving ahead would kill the last remaining member of a species, but that project is deemed to be in the national interest, the government can technically still build baby build. Oh, and they really didn't fix the concerns around Indigenous consultation, like, at all. To the point that Indigenous leaders have warned that this bill passing creates the conditions for Idle No More 2.0, which was a massive Indigenous-led protest movement that demanded the government respect Indigenous rights, sovereignty, and land. Now, I want to give you a big caveat here. I was planning to make a different video tonight, and I am going to quickly tell you what that was going to be about. But this bill became law tonight, and that is really important to talk about. Still, the story I was going to report was important too. About a week ago, I reached out to the federal government to ask about the fact that the Trump administration had pulled the plug on a specialized support hotline for LGBTQIA+ youth who are considering leaving us. I wanted to know how our government plans to protect the 2S LGBTQIA+ community from similar attacks here on the things they need to survive, as well as whether moves like this have prompted Canada to reconsider its safe third country agreement with the United States. To seriously oversimplify it, that agreement means that if you land in the US first, you can't seek asylum in Canada. Now, the government didn't answer that part of my question, but a spokesperson for the Minister for Women and Gender Equality, Richie Valdez, told me, quote, "We are deeply troubled by the rollback of queer rights abroad. At a time when 2S LGBTQI+ communities are under threat, Canada will continue to stand up to hate in all its forms." They also highlighted a $1.5 million investment in security funding for Pride, which is intended to ensure that people can celebrate safely in communities across the country. They also promised to, quote, "protect and defend rights in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, because equality is not optional, it's constitutional." I hope that means that when provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan attack life-saving healthcare for trans youth, we can expect the federal government to do something. Speaking of attacking rights, we need to get back to Bill C-5. Now, because I was planning to cover something else and then this became law tonight, I don't have a ton to say about the meat and potatoes of this bill. But I did my best, and I can tell you that organizations like Climate Action Network Canada are sounding the alarm that even if some amendments in the House had improved the bill, it should not have made it through the Senate without further amendments. As it stands now, the law, quote, "erodes democratic principles, runs roughshod over Indigenous rights, shuts Canadians out of decisions that could affect them, and puts the environment at risk." Here's the issue here. Mark Carney made this big ol' promise of free trade by Canada Day. And Canada Day is coming up. And it just so happens that the bill that strikes down the federal internal trade barriers also has like a whole massive other part to it. The part that allows the government to fast-track approvals for major projects, like pipelines, mines, energy grids, when they're deemed to be in the national interest. Now, the OG version of this bill was really bad. But the House of Commons made some tweaks to it that improved transparency and reporting rules. And they also ensured that while the government can override some laws if a project is deemed to be in the national interest, they added that it can't override others like the Indian Act, the Canada Labour Code, and the Criminal Code. So, at least for that. However, most environmental law and regulations can be skipped over in the national interest. For example, they can run roughshod over stuff like the Fisheries Act, the Species at Risk Act, the Canadian Navigable Waters Act, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, the Migratory Birds Convention Act, and the Impact Assessment Act. That's according to reporting from the National Observer, which also goes on to say that they can ignore regulations like wildlife area regulations, marine mammal regulations, 2 migratory birds regulations, and more. Most of these laws and regulations exist for a reason, by the way. Like, they didn't just make them up for fun. Here's how Tim Gray, the Executive Director of Environmental Defence, put it. Quote, "Bill C-5, which is now law, like its cousin, Ontario's Bill 5, takes us backward to a time when major developments went ahead without proper review. Polluters filled our drinking water and air with toxins, and the public were told to sit down and shut up about the impact. This is not progress, and the costs to the country could be catastrophic. Parliament passed laws to address threats to our health and the environment, and they should never be bypassed without discussion and debate. Meanwhile, Indigenous communities have made it incredibly clear that the bill does not leave enough space for meaningful consultation rooted in the principles of free, prior, and informed consent. They told us this again and again and again. Here's a taste of what some Indigenous leaders had to say in a press conference on Parliament Hill before Bill C-5 passed the House.
I can tell you that the First Nation rights holders know what sovereignty is about, and they know what threats are about as well. We have been subject to colonial legislation since the government has been making legislation, and C-5 is the wrong way to go about it.
I just want to start off by saying that how profoundly disappointed we are in this new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, and his government. That after so many years of his predecessor's effort to try to make that relationship work between this government and First Nations, that it's gone so many steps backwards, and that trust and that respect that we had worked so hard to build is pretty much gone.
We all come from the same walk of being, and we're all humans. And to be human, we all require elements of this land to live. So if the land is sick, we're going to be sick as well.
Yeah, and the amendments that were made did not do enough to assuage Indigenous leaders who are continuing to speak out. And now this bill is passed into law, with no further changes made. A lot is going to depend on how the government chooses to use these new powers now. But no matter what promises Carney's government has made, this legislation gives this government and any future, including conservative government, powers that several advocacy groups are warning threaten our environment, democracy, and Indigenous rights. Well, at least we got free trade by Canada Day. Or at least federal internal trade barriers stuck down by Canada Day, something that also there's been some critiques of, but that's enough. What do you think of all this?